I'm Valerie Martin, and I graduated from the MFA program in 1974. I'm going to read a little bit of a story that was published in this 50th anniversary issue of the Massachusetts Review. I have had stories in the Massachusetts Review over the years, and always felt fortunate to have that home to turn to. I've been writing some stories that take place in 19th century Louisiana these days, back to my root, as Grandma used to say. And they're stories that have a kind of mythological component. This story has to do with a murder. I've been reading some stories by Leonardo Sciascia, and I like his way of having a murder investigation reveal everything about a town. In this, the murdered victim was from out of town, and he was found with his child strapped to his chest, and he was shot through the child. So both he and the child died. The child's mother was named Odile, and she is the most beautiful young woman in this town. The prosecutor has discovered that before he died, the victim took out $1,000 in gold from a bank, and so he has arrived at the sheriff's office where Odile's husband, Octave, not the father of the dead child, is imprisoned. When the court official arrived with a court order to search the house of Octave Favreau, Sheriff Pettit expressed his outrage with some vehemence. His first impulse was to warn Odile that he would be obliged to carry out the order, but the official, calm in the face of resistance and sure of his duty to court, insisted that the action must be performed without delay, and that he would accompany the search party and report the results to the prosecutor. "What in God's name are we looking for?" exclaimed the indignant sheriff. "We go through that poor lady's armoire? Are we rifle her linens and her dresses and her undergarments?" "You're looking for $1,000 in gold coin," retorted the messenger, "so I would think the armoire might be a very likely place to look." Sheriff Pettit rose ponderously from his desk, lumbered to the door of the prison room, and threw it open with more than necessary force. "Octave," he shouted into the dim room, "have you got $1,000 in gold at your place?" "I do not," came the offended reply. The sheriff turned a glacial eye upon the court official. "There you are," he said. "You don't have it." The official was not amused by the sheriff's complacency. A boy was sent out and 3 men to be deputized, and in the afternoon, accompanied by the court official, they set out for the Favreau house. Though not grand, this was a comfortable, spacious cottage with wide porches across the front and the back, the front giving on to a lane of old oaks, the back upon a wide green lawn ending at the sparkling blue of the bayou. A fanciful screened gazebo with a domed roof and classical columns appeared to float upon a cloud of pink azaleas near water's edge. Odile's mother, a dignified lady, in whose features the original stamp of her daughter's loveliness was still evident, greeted her visitors without suspicion, for she knew the deputies by their first names. The court official stepped forward, proffering the order to search the premises, while the townsmen hung back sheepishly, embarrassed by their mission. Mrs. Chopin studied the document, clearly mystified. "What does it mean?" she asked calmly. "It means these men must come in now and search your house." "My daughter is ill," she said coldly. "Surely this can wait until she is recovered." At this the deputies literally hung their heads, but the court official was firm. "I'm afraid not, ma'am," he said. "The warrant must be carried out without notice." Mrs. Chopin gave the official, who was young enough to be her son, a long, searching look. Something she saw, perhaps his inherent obstinacy, piqued her interest. "Because you think we might take the opportunity to hide whatever it is you're looking for?" she observed. "That's not for me to say, ma'am," he replied. "The court is very clear on the procedure, and it's my duty to carry out the wishes of the court." "The wishes?" she repeated. "The orders," he corrected. "That's a court order you're holding." As she folded the paper and handed it back to the young man, the faintest of smiles played at the corners of her mouth. "I see," she said. "My daughter is resting in the parlor. I don't want her needlessly disturbed. I'll bring her out and sit with her in the gazebo, while you gentlemen," she nodded at the miserable trio skulking on the steps, "go about your business here." As she turned to re-enter her daughter's house, the young man stepped forward, his hand raised as if to make a salient point. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said. "I'll have to accompany you." Her only reaction was a visible drawing up of the spine, a slight tilt of her chin in the direction of her unwelcome visitor. "Very well," she said. "Come along." The 3 deputies retreated to the shade of an oak tree, scarcely speaking as they waited, each of them feeling in his own conscience the burden of this unsolicited rifling the personal possessions of a wealthy man, upon whom adversity had fallen as surely as it falls on the indigent and the poor, was not an honorable activity. If Octave had been a skinflint or a brute, there might be some pleasure in seeing brought low. But he was a gentleman, a fair employer, a man's sense of duty to his family had been sorely tested and proved sufficient to the test. At last the screen door opened, and Odile Favreau, supported on one side by her mother and followed with ecclesiastical solemnity by the court official, stepped out. Odile was dressed in black, her pale face partially obscured by her dark hair, which fell loosely over her shoulders. She kept her eyes down, inclining her head toward her mother's ear and mumbling something the men couldn't make out. She was spectrally thin. The forearm that showed beyond the sleeve of her dress was nearly fleshless. Nervously she tapped her long, skeletal fingers against her mother's shoulder. The two women descended the steps, turning from the walk onto the worn path to the gazebo. It was a bright, clear, fresh fall day, but to the men following the melancholy passage of this wraith, whose beauty and vivacity had once entranced the town in a blissful spell, it was as if a cold rose in her wake and smote the bright shore on which they wonderingly stood. Thanks.